Pragmata. If you are at all plugged into gaming news, you've heard about this one. Depending on what corner of the internet you inhabit and what form of brain rot you subscribe to, it's either been presented to you as PDF file bait, a power fantasy for incels, dad simulator, or literal Nazi propaganda, or if you're in the other camp, it's a long overdue celebration of traditional masculine duty, a boldly pro-natalist message, and a massive middle finger to modern progressive audiences. Yeah, it's basically been a toxic slurry of labels and finger pointing, a discourse so loud and toxic it's basically drowned out the fact that there's an actual game at the center of it. Surprisingly, there are very few people talking about the actual gameplay, and that's what I want to get into in this. Is it any good? Well, actually, yeah, it is. But to explain why, I have to tell you the story of how I ended up here in the first place. A couple months back, I finished Expedition 33 after spending, apparently 181 hours finding absolutely everything there is to do. It was a game so genuinely brilliant, it actually made me enjoy being alive for a bit. It reinvigorated my love for gaming to such a degree that I found myself prowling the digital storefronts like a starving man in a supermarket, desperate for another single-player narrative to sink my teeth into. So, naturally, I turned to Resident Evil Requiem. I'd never really touched the franchise before, but I figured I'd give it a go. About 4 hours in, and it was fine. A perfectly functional piece of software, but the characters felt about as three-dimensional as a wet postage stamp, but then again the puzzles and the jump scares were stimulating enough. It just wasn't grabbing me by the throat the way I wanted it to. Maybe I just wasn't far enough into it yet. Then one day, I was browsing Steam, and I saw this. From a graphic design point of view, this banner jumped off the screen at me. The sterile whites against the crisp blues, the hushed tone of this banner, the use of so much negative space. In a digital marketplace where everything is trying to grab your attention by being as visually loud as possible, Capcom managed to make the quietest thing on my screen the most attention-grabbing. So I clicked on it, browsed through some screenshots, and went back to playing Resident Evil. A couple weeks later, the algorithm started whispering, "Hey, that game you were looking at the other day? People are crashing out over it, man. You gotta come look. People are losing their shit." What, is the anti-woke mob mad that there's the option to play a gay character? No. Or, let me guess, the wokey mob is mad that the game didn't meet their demographic checklist for representation. Neither. It's a game that supposedly gives you baby fever. A story so unironically earnest, it's apparently causing grown men to trade their nihilism for a sudden urge to start a family. Oh. Well, that's a new one. Who would even be mad about that? Never mind. I gotta look into this. Pragmata's Steam user score is beating Claire Obscure? Gimme. Gimme. And that's how we've ended up here. At first glance, this looks just like another third-person sci-fi action shooter. I had pretty much sworn off shooter games years ago because I kind of felt like they were all sort of the same, just variations on the same core gameplay mechanic. I felt like that formula was already perfected decades ago. I mean, once you've played Halo 2, can you really hope for anything to be drastically better than that? At best, a shooting game can hope to be as good, but with some significant differences. Pragmata itself only adds one major change to the run and shoot formula, but it is one that so significantly changes the game. It feels like a totally new kind of combat that I've never seen before. And that's the hacking mechanic. Now, when I show you this screen, if you haven't played the game before, this probably makes no sense and means nothing to you. So let me explain how this works. Enemies are essentially bulletproof until you hack them. When you aim at an enemy, this hacking matrix, those squares on the right side of the screen appear. You control which square you're on with the face buttons on the controller. You move through the different squares to get to the green button, and that initiates the hack in which the enemy's armor opens up and they become vulnerable to damage. These blue squares that you pass through on your way to the green one have different effects depending on what you have equipped. The yellow ones are consumable, and they will have extra effects. So, because they're consumable, you may not necessarily want to pass through them if you're on a very easy encounter. And the type of effects that those yellow nodes can have could be like freeze, which would stop them in place. Overheat, you can confuse them so that they start attacking each other. Various interesting different types of effects. Sometimes the matrix that you have to navigate will have a bunch of gray squares that you can't pass through, that you'll have to go around. Sometimes there will be these red squares, which if you do pass through them, will reset you back to your starting position. Sometimes the matrix itself is more complicated and a little bit more difficult to navigate. And you have to do all of this at the same time while you're moving around, shooting, toggling between weapons, avoiding enemy fire. It demands a level of cognitive multitasking, which is just so satisfying to play. Now, if you're playing on mouse and keyboard, the way this is done is by holding Alt, and that switches the mouse from controlling the direction that you're facing to controlling how you're moving through the hacking matrix. Now, admittedly, this is much, much quicker, and if this was a competitive multiplayer game, that would probably be the way most people who want to win would play. However, even though it is much quicker, it also means that you kind of lose control of changing the direction that you're facing, and kind of takes away the fun of it because you're no longer doing two things at once, which was kind of the whole point. So for that reason, this is probably the first and only shooting game where I would actually recommend playing on a controller over a mouse and keyboard if you want to optimize for the most fun. The multitasking just feels so specifically optimized for the ADHD brain. It forces you into a state of total sensory saturation. It gets you into like a flow state where you simply cannot pay attention to anything else. Your attention is completely soaked up by the game. Individually, each element is trivially easy. The hacking is like a simple game of Snake, but at toddler difficulty. The shooting and dodging are trivially easy because the enemies move quite slowly and broadcast exactly when they are about to attack. And even doing both at once isn't too bad, but as you get farther into the game, it starts forcing you to do both simultaneously while managing several enemies in a very tight, close quarters situation. Imagine trying to maintain the hacking rhythm while a turret in the corner of the room is sweeping beams across the floor that you have to jump over, because if you get clipped, it shorts out your connection and makes you completely unable to hack. Suddenly you aren't just playing a shooter, you're managing a high-stakes data feed while platforming? It's a state of total sensory saturation that shuts out the rest of the world. And honestly, it's some of the most engaging fun I've had in a shooter in a very long time. But we can't talk about the experience without talking about the visuals that frame it. And as a former art student, I put a particularly heavy emphasis on the aesthetics of things. And when it comes to game graphics, I think we need to consider two completely different sides of the coin when analyzing them: technical fidelity and art direction. One is engineering, the raw science of convincing your brain that light and texture and movement are real. The other is atmosphere. It's identity, the emotional language of an image. One builds the machinery, the other gives it a soul. On the technical side, Pragmata is genuinely remarkable. People love to complain that graphics have plateaued, that games stopped evolving years ago. But if you want proof that progress is still happening, look at the hair. Thousands of individual strands swaying with weight and inertia, catching the light like threads of silver drifting underwater. It moves with this strange, almost delicate realism. Sure, oftentimes the simulation seems to lose track of where some of those strands are supposed to be and they jitter awkwardly, but honestly, I found that more fascinating than distracting. Little reminders that beneath all of this beauty, there's still a machine struggling to imitate life. There was a part of the game where we were standing in front of a big fan and Diana's hair didn't blow with the wind, and I was like, oof, missed opportunity. That would have looked amazing. Now, full disclosure, I'm playing this on a monster PC with every setting pushed to the might melt your power cord preset. Yes, this actually happened. If you start lowering settings, particularly DLSS, you'll definitely noticed some softness and artifacting around finer details like hair. But thankfully, Pragmata avoids the visual disease currently infecting half the industry, that awful Unreal 5 shimmer that makes every character outline look like it's dissolving into static. Capcom's own in-house RE engine feels almost pristine by comparison. Clean, sharp, stable. There's a confidence to its image quality, like it doesn't need to hide behind post-processing tricks to impress you. In fact, this and Resident Evil 9 are the first games where path tracing seemed genuinely noticeable to me. Usually ray tracing improvements feel subtle, slightly nicer reflections, slightly prettier puddles, but here the entire world changes character when it's enabled. I played with it on at first, then I turned it off for a few hours, then I turned it back on, and suddenly the environment's regained this almost tangible presence. Light stops feeling placed and starts feeling alive. It spills naturally across surfaces, settles into corners, bleeds softly between objects. The world feels less rendered and more observed, like you're peering into something almost physical, rather than assembled out of code. And it honestly makes me wonder if this is just because Capcom did not put the usual amount of effort into the non-ray traced global illumination lighting. Usually developers spend enormous amounts of time painstakingly faking realistic global illumination, carefully placing bounce lighting, tweaking ambient light values, layering tricks on top of tricks just to approximate how light naturally behaves. Here though, the gap between RT on and RT off feels unusually wide. With path tracing disabled, the environments still look good, but the lighting loses a lot of its depth and physicality. Scenes and Diana herself feels flatter, less cohesive, like they're missing that final layer of atmosphere tying everything together. It almost feels as though Capcom assumed most players would have capable hardware and would simply leave ray tracing enabled, and focus their energy instead of exhausting themselves trying to make traditional lighting compete with it. And honestly, I guess I kinda respect that. If you're a Linux user though, the hardware isn't the only thing doing heavy lifting. You're basically already used to surviving an endless war of attrition against compatibility layers. I tried running the game on Ubuntu, and it was practically unplayable. It would hard lock within 5 or 10 minutes. Bazite treated me a little better and actually let me play for extended stretches, but performance gradually decayed the longer the session went on, which is absurd considering that machine had a 5070 Ti in it. And then, because Linux operates according to laws known only to ancient gods and random GitHub commenters, a couple weeks later, it suddenly ran perfectly fine for no discernible reason. But that's just part of the Linux ecosystem at this point. And ray tracing is still unavailable on Linux unless you want to start forcing custom launch arguments and potentially sacrificing entire evenings to Proton experimentation, which I absolutely do not. Oh, and can we please talk about the graphic settings screen? Can we get more games that do this? It actually shows you a visual preview of what each setting does and how it's going to change the image. It's a simple pro-consumer feature that makes you wonder why every other developer is still making us guess what half this shit does. Moving on, technical fidelity alone can't make a game visually memorable. You can have all the rendering technology in the world and still create something emotionally sterile. Technical fidelity is just the canvas. Art direction is the painting itself. And to be honest, despite how polished and visually advanced Pragmata is, the environments themselves didn't leave a massive impression on me. A lot of it falls into fairly familiar sci-fi territory, sterile metal corridors, abandoned futuristic facilities, cold lunar surfaces glowing under artificial light. It might actually explain why the game didn't initially grab me when I first went and looked at screenshots of it. And there were definitely some cool set pieces scattered throughout. Moments where the scale or lighting clicks into place beautifully, like the indoor artificial New York City or the outdoor lunar surface areas. But not a lot of environments that made me stop dead in my tracks just to absorb them. Maybe I'm just spoiled because I'm coming straight off of the back of the surreal painterly dreamscapes of Expedition 33, but Pragmata's world occasionally felt a little too uniform, a little too restrained. And yet, despite that criticism, the game is still consistently gorgeous to look at. Even when the art direction isn't reinventing the wheel, the sheer density of detail, the cinematic lighting, the immaculate material work, and the haunting emptiness of its environments combine into something hypnotic in a way. It's the kind of game where every frame feels expensive, maybe not imaginative enough to burn itself permanently into my memory, but absolutely a feast for the eyes while you're inhabiting it. The enemies, however, are a genuine high point. These killer robots, especially the human analog ones, are deeply unsettling in exactly the right way. They move with this twitchy, mechanical hesitation that feels almost wrong, like puppets trying to imitate human behavior without fully understanding it. And those big-headed, almost infant-like bots are nightmare fuel. Watching them scuttle towards you triggers some primal instinct in your brain. They weaponize innocence in a way that perfectly complements the game's AI gone catastrophically wrong aesthetic. And then there's Diana herself. Her design somehow became the center of endless online screaming. And honestly, a lot of the discourse around her just irritates me. People complain that she doesn't look like a normal girl and immediately leap toward some pretty bizarre and sometimes outright disgusting conclusions. But she's an android. That discomfort is intentional. What a lot of people seem to miss is how heavily her design draws from anime aesthetics. Slightly oversized eyes, a tiny nose, soft doll-like proportions. It's a Japanese studio filtering kawaii sensibilities through an almost hyper-realistic rendering style. That collision of styles is exactly what's triggering the Uncanny Valley response in people. But for a story about an artificial being, it makes total sense. Your brain recognizes enough humanity to empathize with her, while simultaneously detecting something subtly artificial underneath the surface. And it's that uncanny little android girl that brings us back to the center of all the noise surrounding Pragmata, the dad simulator discourse. Which is an insane label, by the way, because as we all know, the true gold standard of dad simulators is the 2015 release, Shower with Your Dad. Pragmata, by comparison, is just a story about a guy in a suit with a very expensive daughter-shaped backpack. The actual narrative core of Pragmata is aggressively simple. You play as Hugh, the sole survivor left on the moon that has been transformed into a digital nightmare by a rogue AI system called IDIS. Your only mission is to protect Diana, a mysterious young android girl who seems to be the only thing IDIS can't fully control, and get back to Earth. That's it. That's the whole pitch. No sprawling mythology, no political allegory, just a man, a machine child, and a collapsing world trying to kill them both. There's a central piece of world building quietly holding the entire setting together. This Luna filament, a bizarre moon-born material capable of replicating almost anything so long as it's given the correct data. It's essentially programmable matter, like 3D printing pushed to its logical endpoint. Weapons, structures, machinery, even seemingly living things can all be made out of it. And it's at the core of everything that's happening here. There is a twist tucked away in the story, one that I won't spoil, but overall, there really isn't that much narrative density to excavate, which is why I find the pro-natalist dad simulator label so bizarrely disproportionate to the actual shape of the game. Never mind why that would necessarily be a bad thing. The quieter moments between Hugh and Diana, watching her fiddle with the gifts you've collected, receiving one of her little drawings, playing hide-and-go-seek with her back at the base, are brief flashes of warmth scattered across an otherwise cold and relentless experience. They probably account for 5% of the game's total runtime at most, and treating those scenes as the ideological thesis of the game feels absurdly reductive. Calling Pragmata a dad simulator because Hugh gradually softens towards Diana is like calling Jurassic Park a pro-family manifesto because Alan Grant starts the movie disliking children and ends it by bonding with a couple of them. Like, no, Jurassic Park is about fucking dinosaurs. And it's about humanity's arrogance, the danger of trying to meddle with nature and dominate forces we don't fully understand. Alan's emotional arc exists, sure, but it isn't the point of the film. It's just texture, a thread running through a much larger experience. Pragmata works the same way. The relationship between Hugh and Diana gives the story emotional grounding, but it isn't the ideological center of gravity people online keep insisting it is. The reaction to the game says far more about the atmosphere of the internet right now than it does about anything present within Pragmata itself. Because the real identity of Pragmata isn't ideology, it's pressure. The game is a sensory overload, constant frantic cognitive plate spinning. You're dodging incoming enemy attacks, managing positioning, protecting Diana, solving hacking sequences in real time, juggling movement and defense while everything around you threatens to collapse into chaos. That pressure, that layering of mechanics and tension, is the actual heart of the experience. The game isn't trying to lecture you, it's trying to overwhelm you. And that's what makes this discourse around it feel so strange. The hyper-political crowd on both sides is so busy trying to claim the game as validation for their worldview, or condemn it as evidence of everything they already distrust in the opposite worldview, that they completely miss what's actually sitting in front of them. Narratively speaking, there's very little here to fight over. In a weird way, the story works precisely because it's such a vacuum. It leaves empty space around its characters instead of over-explaining them. And people seem almost incapable of allowing that emptiness to exist. They rush to fill it with themselves, their anxieties, their politics, their obsessions. Because modern discourse treats ambiguity like a void that must be immediately filled. Meanwhile, Pragmata itself remains almost hilariously indifferent to all of it. The game just keeps moving forward, polished, mechanical, laser-focused on being a high-octane escort mission wrapped in a gorgeous sci-fi spectacle. It doesn't seem remotely interested in participating in the arguments orbiting around it. People are screaming at each other about what the game really means, while the game itself is too busy throwing killer robots at your face to care about what's in your Twitter feed. And maybe that's the quiet irony of it all. The emptier the story leaves its space, the more urgently people reveal what they need it to mean. And in doing so, they end up writing themselves into it, far more clearly than the game ever did. Thanks for watching.
Teammates look out for each other. And we're a team, right?